John Carter never imagined his life would amount to much after the war. Once a decorated soldier, now just another forgotten veteran scraping by on the fringes of human space. He lived in a dingy supply station orbiting the desolate moon of Kestrel 9. His days were spent fixing malfunctioning drones for spare credits, his nights haunted by memories of a past he couldn't outrun. The message came on a slow evening, crackling through his outdated comm unit like a ghost from another world. John Carter, a deep, reverberating voice announced, "By decree of His Majesty, King Xar'Thul of the Drakenar Empire, you have been named the sole inheritor of his most sacred possession." John leaned back, rubbing his temple. A joke? He had no ties to the Drakenar, the reptilian warlords who ruled half the known galaxy. Most humans barely interacted with their kind unless they were soldiers, diplomats, or dead. "You have 24 hours to accept your inheritance," the voice continued. "Failing to do so will be considered an act of forfeiture, and the burden will be passed to another." The message ended abruptly. No details, no explanation, just a ridiculous claim that some alien king had left him something sacred. John exhaled sharply, resisting the urge to delete the message. He didn't have time for cryptic nonsense, but something about it gnawed at him. The war had taught him to trust his gut, and his gut told him this was more than a prank. If a Drakenar king, one of the most powerful rulers in the galaxy, had named him in a will, it meant something. And in his experience, something could either be very profitable or very deadly. Less than an hour later, a ship arrived. No crew, just an automated vessel programmed for one task: retrieval. Against his better judgment, John stepped inside. The doors sealed behind him, and without a word, the ship shot into the abyss. The journey was silent. No pilot, no destination logs, nothing but the hum of ancient engines and the quiet weight of whatever mess he was walking into. Hours passed before the ship finally decelerated, descending toward a darkened world beneath a dying red sun. The landing was smooth, almost too smooth. The hatch unlatched, revealing a barren, rocky wasteland stretching toward the horizon. A single structure stood against the wind, a towering obsidian fortress, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. John stepped forward, boots crunching against the dust. He had no weapon, no plan, and no idea why he was here. But whatever lay inside, he was about to find out. The fortress doors groaned open before he could touch them, revealing a grand hall lined with towering statues of Drakenar warriors. In the center of the room stood a massive figure, easily 3 times his height, its body draped in tattered regal robes. The scent of burning incense lingered in the air, mixing with something more primal, something reptilian. John's pulse quickened as he took in the sight before him. A dragon. It wasn't like the creatures of Earth's myths, but close enough. Thick, armored scales covered its body, cracked and weathered with age. A pair of massive wings hung loosely at its sides, one clearly injured, its membrane torn. Jagged horns framed a face that was both terrifying and regal, its golden eyes staring down at him with something between curiosity and disdain. "So," the dragon rumbled, its voice smooth and unsettlingly human. "You're the one?" John stiffened. He had seen many things in his years as a soldier: alien horrors, cybernetic monstrosities, men who had become more machine than flesh, but nothing unnerved him quite like this. "You can talk?" he asked, before realizing how stupid that sounded. The dragon exhaled sharply, the air shimmering with heat. Clearly, John's mind reeled. Drakenar were intelligent, sure, but they spoke in their own guttural tongue, never in human languages, and certainly not with this level of fluency. "Okay," John said, forcing his nerves down. "Let's start simple. Who the hell are you?" The dragon's tail flicked, rattling the stone beneath them. "I am Xar'Thul, last of the king's guardians. Betrayed, exiled, and now yours." A cold knot formed in John's stomach. "Mine?" The dragon's gaze darkened. "His Majesty's dying wish was to bind me to a human, a species I was raised to despise." His voice dripped with resentment. "For reasons beyond my understanding, the human is you." John clenched his jaw. Whatever game the Drakenar were playing, he wanted no part of it. Look, I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but I didn't sign up to be anyone's keeper. If you're exiled, that sounds like a you problem. Xar'Thul's lips curled in something that might have been amusement. And yet, here you stand, chosen. Unworthy, perhaps, but chosen nonetheless. John had half a mind to turn around and walk back to the ship, but something in the dragon's voice gave him pause. Beneath the bitterness, beneath the arrogance, there was something else, something almost broken. He exhaled, rubbing his temple. Fine, let's say I go along with this. What exactly am I inheriting here? Xar'Thul's wings shifted, his golden eyes narrowing. Power, knowledge, enemies. His tail struck the stone with a resounding crack. And the burden of a war that should have ended long ago. John felt the weight of those words settle over him. He had spent years running from war, only to find himself standing on the edge of another. Xar'Thul tilted his head, studying him. You have a choice, human. Accept what has been given to you, or walk away. John's fist clenched. Walk away. It was the smart choice, the easy choice. But deep down, he knew he wouldn't. The war may have taken everything from him, but it had left him with one unshakable truth. Some fights were worth having. His decision was already made. All right, he said, meeting Xar'Thul's gaze. I'm in. The dragon bared its teeth. Not quite a smile, but something close. Then let us begin. The wind howled through the desolate fortress, carrying the scent of dust and old stone. John Carter sat cross-legged near the dying embers of a fire, his mind heavy with unanswered questions. Across from him, Xar'Thul loomed like a shadow carved from obsidian, his golden eyes reflecting the flickering light. You keep looking at me like I should be grateful, John muttered. But all I see is a walking death sentence. If the Drakenar exiled you, why didn't they just kill you? Xar'Thul let out a low, rumbling chuckle, but there was no amusement in it, because killing me would have been too simple. Exile, disgrace. These are punishments far crueler for a being like me. His voice carried the weight of something ancient, something burdened. But you asked the wrong question, human. The real question is, why did your kind inherit me at all? John exhaled, watching the fire dance in the reflection of the dragon's scales. I figured I'd get to that. Xar'Thul shifted his massive form, the stone beneath him groaning under his weight. Then listen well, Carter. This is a tale of betrayal, of war, and of a king who saw too late the truth that should have saved us all. The fire crackled as Xar'Thul began. Long ago, the Drakenar were conquerors, their empires stretching across the stars, their fleets unmatched in power. They were feared, and rightfully so. But power breeds arrogance, and arrogance blinds even the mighty. When humanity emerged onto the galactic stage, the Drakenar saw only a young, fragile species, one that would either serve or perish. But they were wrong, John said quietly. Xar'Thul's gaze hardened. Very wrong. Your people did not bow. They did not break. You fought like nothing we had encountered before, and you did so with an infuriating resilience. We scorched your colonies. You built them anew. We shattered your fleets. You learned, adapted, returned stronger. His tail curled, claws scraping against stone. For the first time in our history, we faced an enemy that did not fear us. John listened in silence, remembering the stories from old soldiers, the whispered tales of battles fought in the black void, of worlds burned because the Drakenar believed in their superiority. The war was long, costly, and King Xar'Thul saw what few among us could admit. Humanity was not an enemy to be crushed. You were a people who would endure, and more importantly, you were a people who could become something greater. Xar'Thul's voice grew quieter, his eyes distant. But the council would not listen. They called him weak. They whispered of treason. And when I, his most loyal guardian, stood at his side, I was named a traitor as well. His wings twitched, the torn membrane barely shifting. I refused to lead my kin into a war that would destroy us. For that, I was sentenced to death. John frowned. But you're still here. The king defied them. He could not stop my exile, but he ensured I was not slain. Xar'Thul's golden eyes locked onto Jon's. And in his final days, he did something even more unfathomable. He chose to give me to you. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken meaning. Jon ran a hand through his hair. Why? Xar'Thul's jaw tightened. I do not know. Perhaps he saw something in you. Perhaps he wished to forge a bond between our species, even in death. Or perhaps he wished to ensure that the one being the council feared most would never be used against them. Jon leaned back against the cold stone wall, exhaling. And what happens now? Xar'Thul's expression darkened. The council will not let this stand. By taking me, you've been marked. They will come for you, just as they will come for me. Jon let out a short, bitter laugh. Great. So now I've got a bunch of alien warlords who want me dead. They do not want you dead, Carter. Xar'Thul's voice was quiet but firm. They want you erased. Quietly. Without a trace. A chill ran down Jon's spine. He had been a soldier long enough to know what that meant. Assassination, black ops, mercenaries who specialized in making people disappear. If the Drakenar wanted him gone, they wouldn't send an army. They'd send a shadow. Jon stood, pacing. All right. So, options. We run. Xar'Thul's tail flicked. There is nowhere in the galaxy where their reach does not extend. Fight. Against an empire? Xar'Thul's lip curled. You would last minutes. Jon stopped, rubbing his jaw. Then we make it so killing us isn't worth the trouble. Xar'Thul's eyes narrowed. Explain? Jon turned, his mind already working through the possibilities. I've spent years watching how power works. The Drakenar Council doesn't just want you dead. They want you forgotten. That means they fear what you represent. He jabbed a finger toward the dragon. So we make sure you're not forgotten. We make noise. We let people know you're alive. We dig into whatever secrets your king left behind. And we make it clear that if they come for us, they're only making things worse for themselves. Xar'Thul regarded him for a long moment before huffing a breath. Clever. Jon crossed his arms. You don't survive long in war without learning how to be. The dragon's golden eyes glowed in the firelight. Then we begin at once. If we are to uncover the king's final secrets, we must move quickly. His wings shifted, painful but determined. The council will come, but we will be ready. Jon felt the weight of what he had stepped in to press against him. But beneath it, for the first time in years, he felt something else. Purpose. And that was worth fighting for. The stars stretched endlessly above the ruined battlefield, their cold light casting long shadows over the shattered remains of the Drakenar stronghold. Smoke curled from the wreckage of fallen warships, their hulking forms broken against the blackened stone. Jon Carter stood amidst the wreckage, his breath ragged, his body screaming from wounds that would have felled a lesser man. Beside him, Xar'Thul loomed like a living monument to war, his once pristine scales marred with fresh burns and deep gashes. His wings trembled, one barely capable of folding against his back. And yet, despite the agony in his stance, there was something else in his gaze, something Jon hadn't seen before. Victory. The battle had not been won easily. The Drakenar Council had moved faster than expected, their assassins striking with a precision only centuries of conquest could hone. The first wave had come in the dead of night, silent killers, cloaked in shadow, wielding weapons designed not for combat, but for execution. They had underestimated Jon's instincts. A soldier learned to sense death before it struck, to wake seconds before the blade fell. He had taken out the first assassin with a single shot to the throat. The second had been less fortunate. Xar'Thul had torn him in half before his weapon even cleared its sheath. But that had only been the beginning. The council had not sent mere soldiers. They had sent enforcers, warriors bred for one purpose, to erase threats. They had descended like wraiths, a dozen at first, then 2 dozen, then an entire vanguard force, armored in the shimmering black of Drakenar elite combat units. Their warships had burned through the atmosphere, unleashing hellfire upon the fortress, their cannons tearing through stone and steel alike. Jon and Xar'Thul had fought back, not with numbers, but with desperation. Jon had used everything he knew: human tactics, guerrilla warfare, explosive scavenge from the ruins of a war long forgotten. He had set traps, turned the fortress into a death trap, made every corridor a gauntlet of fire and steel. And when the Drakenar elite breached the final gate, Xar'Thul had met them head-on, his claws carving through armor, his fire reducing warriors to ash. But even dragons had limits. Xar'Thul had faltered, his strength nearly spent, his wings too damaged for flight. Jon had nearly fallen beside him, his body broken, his weapon empty. The enemy had closed in, victory nearly within their grasp. And then the message had reached them. Jon had transmitted everything, every secret, every hidden betrayal, every classified document they had unearthed about the war, about the king's true intentions, about the council's lies. He had sent it all to the one place the Drakenar couldn't silence, the Galactic Network, the shared information grid that connected every major species in the universe. The truth was no longer theirs to bury. The council's soldiers had hesitated, and hesitation had been their downfall. Xar'Thul had seized the moment, rallying what strength remained, unleashing a final, furious assault that had shattered the Drakenar forces. The battle had turned, and in the span of heartbeats, the hunters had become the hunted. Now, in the aftermath, Jon turned to Xar'Thul, wiping blood from his brow. "You still breathing?" The dragon exhaled a slow, heavy breath, his golden eyes surveying the battlefield. "Barely." His voice was rough, strained, but steady. "But I live." Jon nodded, pressing a hand against his wounded side. "So what now?" "We killed their assassins, wrecked their fleet, and exposed their secrets to half the galaxy. Feels like we just kicked a hornet's nest the size of a planet." Xar'Thul rumbled, the sound somewhere between amusement and exhaustion. "Perhaps, but a hornet's nest burns like anything else." Jon glanced toward the sky. Even now, he could see the distant glow of ships, some Drakenar, some human, some belonging to species that had watched the war from the sidelines. They had seen the truth, and the truth had weight. The Council's power had not been destroyed, but it had been fractured. A government that ruled by fear could not afford to be exposed as cowards. And cowards, Jon knew, rarely lasted long in the political game of empires. Xar'Thul shifted his wings, wincing. "The war they wish to start has been ended before it could begin." Jon gave a tired smile. "Good. I was getting real sick of wars." The dragon regarded him for a long moment. "You fought well, human." There was something new in his voice, respect, perhaps even something dangerously close to admiration. Jon shrugged. "Didn't have much of a choice." "Few do." Xar'Thul's gaze flickered toward the wreckage. "And yet most still fall." Jon let the words hang between them before exhaling. "So, what about you? You're free now. No king, no chains. You could go anywhere, do anything." Xar'Thul looked at him, the firelight casting shadows across his battle-worn form. "And you, Carter?" Jon hesitated. For the first time in years, he had no orders, no mission, no war to fight. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. But then he looked at the dragon beside him, the being who had once been his unwanted inheritance and was now. What? A comrade? A friend? He let out a breath and shook his head. "Hell if I know." Xar'Thul huffed. "Then perhaps we should find out together." Jon chuckled, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Guess we should." The night stretched on, quiet, filled with the ghosts of battles past. But for the first time, Jon Carter wasn't just a soldier running from his past. He was something else. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.